Hi there. Another one on Ukraine here. Busy weekend, hockey tournament for my old timers hockey team. We played Friday night, Saturday morning at 9, Saturday evening at 5. Sorry, Thursday night, Friday morning, Friday night, and now we're in the final, which starts in a few hours. The body's a little bit stiff. We lost the first game and won the next two, so we're in the final. Language in Ukraine. Big issue there is the status of the Russian language. I cannot, to me, if I were a Ukrainian, I would want to have two official languages, Ukrainian and Russian. I understand that the people who want to build up a stronger sense of Ukrainian identity want to use the language as a tool for doing this. And a lot of their actions and attitudes, when I listen to politicians from Western Ukraine, Ukrainian speaking, remind me of Quebec, Catalonia, and wherever, Basque countries, wherever language becomes involved in politics. But if we go to the Ukraine, I think the feeling in Western Ukraine, which has, Western Ukraine, largely Ukrainian speaking, Eastern Ukraine, largely Russian speaking, Western Ukraine, formerly part of Polish, Lithuania, whatever kingdom, part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, part of Poland, very different history. Eastern Ukraine, part of Tsarist Russia, part of the Soviet Union for a much longer time than the Western Ukraine, different history, different language. Of course, many people in Eastern Ukraine are also speakers of Ukrainian, either as a first language or as a second language. People in Western Ukraine, from what I can gather, just about everybody speaks Russian very well. The concern, I think, on the part of the Western Ukrainians is if we don't, quote, force people to learn learn Ukrainian, then we will be watering down our national identity and we risk being flooded by the much more powerful Russian language. But if half the population, roughly, whatever the number is, has Russian as their native mother tongue spoken by their parents and grandparents, and if those people consider themselves to be Ukrainian, which I gather is the case with most of the people, even in the Eastern Ukraine, the number who want to join Russia is, even in the present circumstances, like 30%, no more. Therefore, to me, that language should be recognized. And right now the government in Kiev is saying, well, we now have this law that wherever the local population exceeds whatever it is, 10%, then their language will be considered official within that region. But to my mind, that's not a good solution. And then, of course, the government in Kiev says, Russian and or whatever, Hungarian, Romanian, sort of trying to equate the status of Russian with the status of these other, or Bulgarian, or languages spoken by very, very few people in Ukraine. And, if it were me, as I said earlier, first of all, I said in my first video that the new government began by changing the language law that allowed this official status for minority languages. And I said at that time, are these people completely stupid? Their economy is a shambles, their country is disunited, and the first thing they do is to challenge the language status of what's as an important a language in Ukraine as Ukrainian. Not very smart. The president, Turchinov, vetoed it. Fine, but the damage is done. And now that's being used all the time by the Russians, by the Party of Regions people, as another stick with which to hit the government in Kiev. Now they're saying, well, we'll restore that. Or they're saying, we'll allow, the other part of it is this whole autonomy or federalization or whatever they call it. And so the suggestion is if Eastern Ukraine is primarily Russian speaking, then Russian could be official in Eastern Ukraine. I think there's dangers with that. And I listened to an interview on Echo Moskvy with Boris Kolesnikov, who strikes me as an extremely reasonable person. Amongst all of these flamboyant orators in Ukraine, whether from the West or from the East, you know, fiery language. He just sounded like a voice of reason. And he said that Russian and Ukrainian should be official across the country. In Lvov, in Donetsk, if you can't speak Russian and Ukrainian, you can't work for the government. He also raised the issue that I had raised earlier when I first listened to an interview, again at Echo Must Be, where, what's his name, Alexei Venediktov, interviewed the new Ukrainian education minister, who said, in our universities we have two languages, English and Ukrainian. And I said to myself, well, that's ridiculous. If I'm a Russian-speaking Ukrainian from Donetsk, and I can't take, and granted we have elementary and high school in Russian, but when I go to university, I have to take my engineering course, my medical, legal, whatever, in Ukrainian. I can't take it in Russian. To me, that's just not fair. They can offer, and probably should offer, courses in both Russian and Ukrainian, both in Lvov, Lviv, and in Donetsk or in Lugansk. But it should be available, and similarly, all government offices, including in Ivano-Frankivsk or wherever it might be, government services should be available in French and English, like at home, in Ukrainian and Russian, so that the whole country becomes bilingual. To me, because one of the senses you get when I watch, for example, Schuster Live, is the tremendous amount of, between the Western Ukrainians, largely Ukrainian speaking, and the Eastern Ukrainians, they both seem to want to show this great contempt for the other side. They're not moderate. They're not looking for common ground, even though they say they are. In one moment they'll say we've got to find a common ground, we've got to have a dialogue, and then they'll launch off into this tirade. And I find the Ukrainians, on both sides, they will never use 10 words to say something. They will use 100 words. Like, I got the message. And then over and over and over again. And so that all of this inflammatory rhetoric, in that sense, the person who impressed me the most the other night on Schuster Live was our friend, the heavyweight boxer, Klitschko, Vitaly Klitschko. He's not a great speaker. He's not a fiery speaker. Good for him. I'm tired of hearing Timoshenko. I'm tired of hearing whatever this other fellow was from the Party of Regions, and especially the you know, Tsaryov and Dobkin, and they all seem so angry and so cynical, and we need people with just kind of, and I by that same token, I find Poroshenko you know, relaxing to listen to, and I think, and this fellow here, what was his name again? Kolesnikov, Boris Kolesnikov. Calm down the rhetoric, find some common ground. And so on the issue of language, and the other advantage of that is, if you have Western Ukrainians, Ukrainian speaking, Eastern Ukrainians, Russian speaking, you're basically dividing the country. You should have, in my opinion, as a foreigner, 2 official languages across the whole country, and lots of exchange. Another thing that impressed me with Boris Kolesnikov is one of the earliest sessions of Schuster Live that I watched was one where they had various, I guess they always have, you know, deputies from the Rada. They were Party of Regions, which Party of Regions is basically Yanukovych's party, pro-Russian. They got kicked out largely because of the Maidan and the events that occurred there. And so now they are kind of using the violence in Eastern Ukraine kind of as a bit of a horse that they can ride to get back into power. The whole thing, there's like so many different levels of plots and subplots. But anyway, at this particular meeting, in addition to the normal politicians haranguing each other, they had some students, and the Donbass or Donetsk hockey team in the KHL, Russian Hockey League, had organized this exchange of students from Donetsk and Lviv, and they had exchanged. And they even had a former NHL hockey player, a Ukrainian, Fedotenko, as we called him, Fedotenka, there. He wasn't very interested in talking politics. But obviously this was organized by the Donetsk hockey team, by Mr. Boris Kolesnikov. So the minute I heard the interview there, and it's this president of the Donetsk hockey team. And he's also a man who organized the Euro 2012 events in Ukraine, which apparently were done very successfully. He's a self-made, he's again one of these wealthy oligarchs, but he didn't make his money by stealing state assets. From what I can tell, he's a private businessman, a successful one. I don't know, who knows? I was impressed by him, and I think if people like him and Poroshenko and Klitschko talk more, and some of the more, inflammatory guys like Sobolyev on the Batkivshina, whatever it's called, party, or even Timoshenko with all her constant, Jeanne d'Arc imagery, then there might be some hope. So, here you have it on language, which is something I'm interested in. And it's not a matter of learning it, because from what I can gather, first of all, Ukrainian is so similar to Russian. And right now I'm trying to learn Ukrainian so I can understand what these Western Ukrainian politicians are saying. And what I do is I read stuff on the Ukrainian newspaper, and I take it, copy it. Now, rather than putting it into Google Translate, which I had been doing, I'm taking it into Link. I'm using the Hebrew slot because I'm not planning to study Hebrew anytime soon. And then I use Google Translate. And of course, each time I go to Google Translate, I have to change the language to Ukrainian because I'm in the Hebrew slot. It wants to go to Hebrew, but so it's a little more time consuming. But I can actually start building up, a series of lessons now in Ukrainian, where I'm gradually converting these words into words that I can understand, rereading them again, looking at my yellow links, and each time I do it, I pick up a few more words. And so each time I listen to Schuster Live and I listen to the Ukrainians, I understand more and more of what they're saying. So that's kind of fun for me to use my interest in the events in Ukraine as a sort of a motivator for learning Ukrainian. But as a foreigner, no dog in the fight, as they say. I think that Ukraine, the Kiev government, should just come out and say, we have 2 official languages across the whole country, just as Mr. Boris Kolesnikov, owner of the